Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Logan Albright, back with another book review. And today I want to talk about a rather special book, a very influential, very important book, and one I had never read until just recently. And so I'm excited to talk to you about it. And the book I'm talking about is The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. This was written in 524 AD, roughly. So it's early modern period. This was written in roughly 524 AD, so it's fairly early by modern standards. Not as early as the classical philosophers, but heavily influenced by them. And basically, this is a tract that Boethius wrote while in prison and awaiting execution to kind of console himself for the misfortune that he had undergone, and having lost everything that he held dear. Trying to figure out why bad things happen to good people, why good things happen to bad people, why evil is sometimes triumphant, and trying to reconcile all this with his faith and with his philosophical beliefs and the teachings of older philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, Socrates, and all those guys. So this is what he came up with, and it's a kind of allegorical dialogue between himself and the embodiment of the concept of philosophy, who appears to him as a woman who explains to him that things aren't really as bad as they might seem. It's quite short. This edition, translated by Richard Green, is about 150 pages. It's published by Dover Publications, quite inexpensive if you wish to pick it up. Also, being out of copyright, it's available online through things like Project Gutenberg for free if you don't want a physical book, but I like to have a physical book. And it's divided up into 5 different sections called books, and he goes through this kind of very syllogistic logical argument to explain the nature of suffering, why, the apparent injustice of the universe, and why that's actually an illusion. And I thought this was an incredibly inspiring and beautiful book. It's something that we all need to hear in this time when people are really upset and stressed out and having a hard time with the world, to kind of put things in perspective and make you realize that things are not nearly as bad as you think they are, and that, the things that you think are important are not really that important in the grand scheme of things. So Boethius starts out by kind of demonstrating the things that we think are important in life, things like wealth and power and fame, don't really make you happy. They don't really bring about the best things in life. They are fleeting. They are just gifts of fortune. And just as fortune can give you things, fortune can take things away from you just as easily. And you have to expect that, because that's the nature of fortune. That's what fortune does. Fortune is like a wheel that turns. The wheel of fortune imagery that we so often see actually comes from this book. He's the kind of the originator of that concept of the wheel of fortune. And he points out that just as you wouldn't get mad at like the tide for going out, the tide comes in, the tide goes out. Just as it'd be ridiculous to get mad for the sun going down at night and say, well, we had all this beautiful sunlight and now the sun is gone and we have darkness. That's not fair. Like, you wouldn't get mad about that, because that's just the natural way that the universe works. And he allegorizes fortune to work the same way. Fortune gives us good stuff. Fortune takes away stuff. It was never really ours to begin with, because we're born with nothing. And we should be grateful for the gifts we get while we have them, and not be too upset when they go away, because we were never really entitled to them in the first place. We were just lucky for a while, and then the luck ran out. But that's what you should expect, and that's what you should anticipate to happen if you are living in the world and you're obeying the natural laws of the world and the way things go. He goes on to point out that the material things that we think accumulate to wicked men, things like wealth and fame and fortune and power and all these things, these men are not to be envied for these things, because the things that they get don't make them good. They continue to be wicked, and in their wickedness they continue to be suboptimal human beings, because to be as good as you can be as a human, to participate in life in the fullest, you have to be good. You have to find virtue and find what makes you happy in life and do those things. And the wicked people are remaining wicked in spite of the fact that they've been given all these gifts of fortune, in spite of the fact that they have been given wealth and given fame and given power. And so that's not anything to be envied. You don't want to be like those people, because you don't want to be wicked like they are. You want to be good. And so clearly, if those things don't make you happy, those things don't make you a good person, then why would you want them in the first place? So I think that's quite a good observation. I think both of those are good observations. I really like the perspective that he puts things in. And I've been reading a lot about kind of Hindu philosophy and occultism and things like that. And it's a very similar kind of outlook to even the Buddhist philosophy, which is a little bit more nihilistic or pessimistic, you might say. It's quite similar to that kind of outlook, and I find that good. And then he talks about how wickedness is its own punishment, and that we should pity the evil person, because the evil person is ignorant of what the true good is, and they're stumbling around in the dark, and they can't find their way to goodness and virtue. And what they're doing is it's just out of ignorance, and it's out of not being able to find the true light. And that's something that's a sad thing. And we should feel sorry for them instead of being angry at them, because they haven't found the right way to live. And we have found the right way to live, hopefully, or at least we're on our way to finding the right way to live. And they should be kind of try to bring them around to the right way of living instead of just being angry at them and punishing them, which again I think is a very powerful message and something to think about. It's the whole love your enemy thing, which is sometimes hard to swallow, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. Now, I will say that Boethius doesn't convince me about everything. He kind of loses me towards the end. In book 4, he goes on to talk about kind of the orderly plan of the universe that's directed by God, and that everything is part of God's plan, and that people are given what they need to be given. So if good people are given suffering, it's because they need that suffering. Either it's what they can bear, it's what they can handle, and maybe it'll keep them on the righteous path, and it'll keep them from straying into laziness and sin and all these things. And then the evil people get what they deserve as well, because it's part of God's plan. Because maybe if they had it worse off, it would break them, and they would become even more evil, and they would go into crime, or maybe the apparent power that the evil people have over others is used to punish other evil people. And it's all this like God works in mysterious ways kind of thing. And he loses me in this chapter. I don't think that this is a good argument, because you can't say that like children suffering and dying of diseases and having this horrible misfortunes to people who are just barely born, people who have just come into life, they haven't done anything to deserve it. Not only have they not done anything to deserve it, but it's hard to see how there's any kind of didactic or useful purpose in their suffering as well. And I think to kind of write that off as, it's just all part of God's plan, I think that's very callous, and I think it's not a very good plan. If that's God's plan, it's not a good plan. It's certainly no purpose is served by children dying of cancer. I'm not on board with that. And this is where I part ways from Boethius' kind of Christian worldview and view that there is a omnipotent being who directs all things and who has everything going towards the good. I don't really believe that. I have a more deist or pantheist view of the divine, which I think is it's sort of compatible with a lot of what Boethius does, because Boethius doesn't actually lecture from a theological standpoint. He doesn't cite the Bible. He doesn't cite any kinds of religious scriptures. He doesn't say you just have to believe this on faith. He kind of tries to logic everything out through the principles that have been established through the classical philosophers, people like Plato and Aristotle. And so if you're not a religious person or you're not a Christian person, I think you can still benefit a lot from what Boethius is talking about. And I think it's particularly useful to maybe young people who don't have a lot of perspective and haven't lived a lot in the world yet, to realize that, the things that we think are important, we need to take a step back and realize that there might be more important things than those to think about. I think that's really valuable and really great. But I'd have to part ways with him on the idea that everything is to the good of God's plan, because I just don't think that's true. And I don't think if you honestly observe the kind of suffering that good people go through, or that innocent children go through, I don't think you can really rationalize that as part of a mysterious plan that you don't understand. I'm willing to accept a lot of what he says about the evil people, wickedness being its own punishment, and they're not really as good off as we think they are, and we shouldn't envy them. I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I'm on board, but he loses me on that section. And then the final section of the book is a treatment of free will versus predestination, which I found interesting because it's certainly an interesting topic, and I pretty much agree with what Boethius has to say on it. But again, it's if you're not kind of bought into the Christian worldview, I don't know how much meaning that chapter will have for you in that section, because he is trying to reconcile the idea of divine foreknowledge with free will. And he claims that God can know everything that's going to happen in the world, and yet that doesn't mean that our actions are predetermined. We do have the freedom to choose. And I think he makes a pretty good logical argument for that. I am a believer in free will myself. I think all of kind of our language and our civilization and our culture hangs on the idea of free will. If you don't have choice, you don't have accountability or responsibility for anything. So I think that we must have some sort of free will, and I'm a believer in that. But if you're not already kind of bought in, I don't know how convincing Boethius' argument will be to you in there. But as kind of just a comforting, like the title is The Consolation of Philosophy, Boethius is consoling himself during this time of difficulty. And I did find it rather consoling. I've had a lot of difficulty in the past year or so, 2 years, trying to wrap my head around the nature of the world and the nature of people, and how feeling a lot of despair and a lot of hopelessness about the world, and having this to try to get you to back up and take a more philosophical view of the world is really helpful, and has been helpful to me. And so I really do recommend it. You can read it fast. Like I said, it's very, very short. You can get through it in a couple of days, and it's something that's worth returning to. I understand that this was one of the most popular and influential books in the world, or in the Western world certainly, for many, many years, close to 1,000 years, and it seems to have been kind of forgotten in most recent years. I had never really, I had heard of it, I guess, but I didn't know anything about it for a long, long time. And so I was very pleased. I was turned on to this book by, I'll give a plug here, Professor Corey Olsen, who does a lot of great videos on Tolkien, who's one of my favorite authors, and he runs a series called Mythgard Academy that's sort of a book club that dives into classic books. And he did a Mythgard Academy on the Consolation of Philosophy, and I really recommend that as a supplementary video series to this work, because it'll really help you understand it better and kind of walk you through it in a more measured pace instead of just rushing through it. Especially if you're not particularly well grounded in people like Plato and Aristotle, it will help you understand what's going on better. So there you go. That's my reading of Boethius, A Consolation of Philosophy. I thought it was a wonderful book. It's probably one I will return to in the future whenever I'm feeling low, while he does lose me in book 4 for part of it, and I don't think all of his arguments hold up. I think it's a really wonderful, beautiful book that makes you just feel better about life and the world and the nature of the universe. So there you go. That's my book review. I've been Logan Albright, your humble host, and I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please feel free to like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click that bell for notifications. I can always use more people subscribing and commenting and helping me continue to make these videos. And if you haven't done it yet, make sure you pre-order my new book, Conform or Be Cast Out, The Literal Demonization of Nonconformists. Link in the description, available everywhere December 1st. I'm trying to get pre-orders up because pre-orders really help you out as a new independent author. They really help your numbers go up and more people find out about your book and find out what's going on. So I would appreciate that. That's all for now. I'll catch you next time. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you later.